All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming through on a Friday night, Friday afternoon, etc. I'm Dylan Rodríguez. I'm professor here at UC Riverside. More importantly, it's a pleasure that I've been able to facilitate, curate this on violence experimental study sequence. And I just want to welcome everyone to the final session for the fall. I'm welcoming my relatively new friend, but I feel like my old friend, William C. Anderson. We're going to be talking about his book, Nation on No Map, Black Anarchism and Abolition. This is going to be led, as the other sessions have been, by the students of MCS 201, the graduate students here. They'll introduce themselves as they go. And then, of course, for folks here who are not part of the graduate seminar, I invite you all to make robust use of the chat, put any questions or thoughts you'd like in the chat, and then we have about an hour, 18 minutes with William. So I'd like to leave some time in the latter part of this conversation for folks who are here in attendance, just to raise questions, share thoughts, anything like that. And you can feel free to do that in the chat. You can come online and talk live. From that, William, welcome. Thanks for coming through. And we'll do it like we've done with the other sequences, and we'll just kind of open things up. I know that this week, I believe our two co-facilitators were Jeffrey and Brianna, right? So I'm going to let Jeffrey and Brianna kind of take the lead. They'll introduce themselves real quick, and we'll just start talking. And of course, I'm going to jump in with my own thoughts and questions and whatnot. But yeah, welcome, William. Thank you for coming through.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Right on. All right. So, Brianna, do you want to get started, and then we'll kind of maybe go between you all, then we'll open it up to the rest of us. Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
I don't know where to look. Hi. Hi, I'm Brianna. Sixth year. I'm technically in medical anthropology, but don't judge me. My work focuses on the production of anti-Blackness in Africa. And I'm just here because I like to learn. Glad to be here.
You want to open up with any questions or?
Oh, I got questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, Jeffrey, why don't you go ahead?
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Acevedo. My pronouns are he and they. I am a second year student in the higher education program here at UCR. I'm studying queer Latino males in higher education and how they come to find a sense of belonging. Happy to be here. Happy to share space with you all. Thank you.
Okay, I think before offering any questions, it might be important to contextualize this moment because there have been a number of anarchists, and particularly Black anarchists, that recently passed away. Alfredo Bonono, Benjamin Zephaniah, and I know influences for you, Martin Sostre, are important to kind of like bring into this space. So I think I'm interested in what I read in your work is like there's a thesis around failure, around like so many kinds of political analyses, whether the consequence of investments in different kinds of stories of success, or just general limitations in how coalitions are orchestrated that we've just been missing. And really, my question is a broad one about what it means to do this work from a Black perspective. And what do you believe, or what have you learned from so many of these failures?
Well, that is a big question. Yeah, I would say to start that the entire process of my radicalization and of coming to terms with these failures and these limitations that I've encountered has shaped where I am politically, obviously at this point. And to be Black has been really a gift to go down this path and to have this experience that I've had. It's been a gift because it's actually, I think, given me a head start in many ways, and a lot of the realizations and a lot of the conclusions that I've come to. Black anarchism is something that opens up everything for question, because it looks at Western radicalism as a whole and calls it all into question. It identifies a lot of those failures, a lot of those shortcomings throughout. And as someone who comes from a organizing background and from a political household, I did have a lot of experiences that would put me on a path towards embracing a lot of the things I now view as limitations. But at the same time, as I said, the Black aspect here, I think, helped me also exceed those things and politically, at least see something that could exceed, rather. So now I feel like I'm in this place where I'm looking around at everything that's happening in the world, and I'm looking around at everything that's transpiring, and I'm able to observe these limitations and failures and ask what more can be done, what can we say, what can we build together that can actually meet people's needs without having people stuck in these repetitive cycles. And the reason that Black anarchism helped me get to this place is because the legacy of Black anarchists has been going through a process which is similar to what I just described, of coming from these different backgrounds, these different organizations, these different places in life where you have a cohort of people who were going from place to place, looking for more, seeing the failures, seeing the limitations, and going to the next place and arriving ultimately at anarchism. So I went down that path myself, just like Lorenzo Camboa Irvin, just like Martin Sostre, just like Kwesi Balagoon, just like Janina Irvin, just like these people who I draw inspiration from. And I'm not trying to compare myself to them, but I am saying that this path that I'm describing is one that is pretty commonplace across the spectrum of Black anarchism. And it is what informs addressing the failure for me and the shortcomings. Does that answer your question?
It does answer the question, and I wonder too, like, it being recorded, sometimes I'm like, I don't always touch all of the things that I want to. So I'm curious, like, to you, what things are failures beyond the obvious things with like celebrities or the way people have oriented and related to the West, or even like crystallizing and concretizing themselves really in different political identities or orientations. But I'm not going to press it because we are being recorded, though I am curious. I think Jeffrey has some questions.
I don't mind. I don't mind if you press it. I'm open. You don't have to hold back for me.
Oh, okay. That might be something to revisit. Jeffrey has a few questions that he wants to ask you too.
Thank you. I think the question that I have right now upon like reading your work is, how do you think of abolition in relation to academia? How would that impact or hinder perhaps the production of knowledge?
How do I feel?
That's a great question. It's great.
Academia does damage to what the possibilities are for abolition in many ways. I mean, it's something that gets co-opted and distorted and watered down. And as much as I could talk about how academia is this or is that, and insult it, I think that one of the important things for us to observe about what's happening with abolition is that it's not limited to academia. It's not just a problem that we see in academia. It's something that actually happens across many different factions of the left. I think that abolition, one of the reasons that I chose to focus on abolition when I was writing this text is because I saw people describing themselves as abolitionists who were state socialists. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of confused because I was wondering why a lot of people who didn't want to abolish prisons, who wanted to reform prisons, who wanted to reform borders, who wanted to reform the state, ultimately, were describing themselves in that way. I was like, I would see people who had this left statist politic talking about abolition in a way where I was like, I think we need to address this elephant in the room, which is that there's a pretty distinct difference between wanting to abolish something completely and get rid of it completely and wanting to reform it. I don't think that abolishing something, I wouldn't actually describe it as abolition if you want to abolish something just to rename it or reconfigure it or reconstruct it with new revolutionary language. Instead of it being the prison, it's the people's prison.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a classic quote from Bakunin, one of the most popular and well-recognized classical anarchists, and he has a quote that I'll just loosely quote, but he says, you know, we're not gonna just he says, you know, the people don't care as much if they're getting hit by a stick when it's called the people's stick.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing I was starting to recognize, was that a lot of people didn't actually, I think, understand their position as reformists. And I'm not saying that to be condescending or anything like that, but it's just the truth of the matter. I feel like we have very different goals across the spectrum of the left. And I started wanting to kind of point that out for people who were new to the left, or maybe people who didn't understand it themselves, or for folks who wanted to see that tension unpacked, and so we could have an honest conversation. So I see that obviously a lot with regard to academia as well, and the way that abolition becomes watered down and distorted to become some magical thing that people can just utilize in whatever way for their own intents and purposes, where it can become some sort of signifier, or it can become something that people just say that they're about to make themselves seem and appear more radical. But again, it's not limited to academia. It's a problem that happens across the spectrum of radicalism, that's not just limited to the academy. It's everywhere. So I think that what we have now is a problem where this word has entered into a process that happens with many words, like decolonize, where it gets emptied of its meaning, it gets stripped of its radical and its revolutionary intent, and it gets watered down to become something that people can play with as a toy when we need it as a weapon.
Hey, William, is it okay if I pick up on what you said, Jeffrey? Can I get you to talk more? I'm thinking about this for posterity, because, you know, if people want to use this discussion as a form of political education, what I think people would benefit from is your explanation, your explication is what I should really say, of the state as being something that cannot be, whether the term is abstracted, whether it's something else, abstracted from a certain root, a certain foundation, a certain way of shaping and institutionalizing power in the world. I mean, that seems to be the irreconcilable antagonism among between a Black anarchist positions generally, Black anarchist positions specifically, and all these iterations of the left that believe in some version of revolution that's actually about either seizing the state, transforming the state, turning the state against its previous version, its previous iteration. And I really, you know, I appreciate and respect the way that you talk about your movement, your political, ideological, and other forms of movement in this book. and about how like all these antagonisms become irreconcilable to the point where you just have to leave. You have to leave it behind a particular set of attachments, political, ideological, organizational, personal, and otherwise. And the state is like haunting all those attachments. You know, I appreciate that too, right? Like the way the state constitutes who people are and how they identify and how they fucking dream, like all that stuff. But like I know this is something I listen to all the time when we talk, when I hear you talk to others. And you know, in especially we were talking before this about a particular argument that you had with a Black nationalist recently that was online. That's there for everyone to see, right? And like how intense that was, but also how like it was, there was a kind of talking past this notion of the state that I think you take such care to examine in all those different dimensions in this book. So could you just break that down for folks a little bit that are watching this video that maybe are just coming into familiarity with your book or maybe haven't read it yet, so that they can appreciate how you're thinking about the state and why it is that you say being an abolitionist, but not being somebody who wants to obsolete or construct autonomy from or abolish the state. It's not really abolition. Like that's the point. I think that's the point that I think is the gem I want you to kind of polish for everybody here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that I'll say that leads to a lot of confrontations, many confrontations that I have, is that when I'm talking about the state, a lot of times people take the state to mean society or the population. So a lot of times when I'm talking about the state, I realize that people have a very different definition of what the state is in their mind. The state is a class instrument. This is a colonial class instrument. We're talking about a apparatus of power that maintains a monopoly on violence. And when you're talking about this monopoly on violence and how it is a class instrument, it is a Eurocentric conception of how to organize society or how to control society, rather. The problem that we encounter is that historically, this debate between state socialists and anti-state socialist anarchists, the debate has been, do we try to control it or do we get rid of it completely? This is the thing about the state. Everybody admits historically throughout the socialist movement that that the state is a problem. That's across the board. Whether you're a state social, classically, whether you were a state socialist or not, people were saying, Marx was saying the state is a problem. Engels was saying the state is a problem. Bakunin saying the state is a problem. Everybody's saying the state is a problem. And that's so when you first realize that, you get to this point where you look around now and you hear people talking about the state in this way that's completely divorced from that recognition, this past recognition, that universal recognition that the state is a problem. And that whether you were trying to control it so that it withered away, quote unquote, over time, we'll one side saying, well, listen, we're going to control it and fix it to be something that works for the people, quote unquote, so much that it's going to disappear, it's going to disintegrate, and then it's going to be gone and we'll have communism. And then you have another side saying, you're not going to be able to take this weapon and make it disintegrate through some sort of efficiency on behalf of the population, and then everything will be better. So that's the classic debate, right? But what comes up now is that this point in time, this version of these different factions of people across the left, a lot of these folks don't even see the state as a problem anymore.
That's right.
They view the state as something that they aspire to control for some sort of revolutionary fantasy of revenge or power, where they're able to fulfill whatever, the case may be. So we've gotten away from what someone like Marx himself was even trying to accomplish in this entertaining the state as something that's reformable or that has potential for revolutionary purposes. We've gotten away from that in terms of a lot of these factions of the left at this point, because what has transpired over time has been, going back to that first point, a series of failures, a series of historical catastrophes and crises that have resulted in revolutionary moments seizing and taking control of this apparatus known as the state, only for it to turn into new oppression, new violence, new sorts of dispossession, new sorts of atrocity. We've had plenty of evidence of that happening in the name of socialism. There's too many to name and too many to count. So at this point, the points that were being made historically across that anti-state faction, the anti-state factions of the socialist movement, have been proven to be true in many regards. But we're still stuck in this place where folks want to either rehash the First International and have this debate all over again. Well, should we try to, the evidence is already there, what the state is. Like, folks have already taken control of it. And what we've gotten has been new ruling classes, again, atrocity. We've seen all types of ethnic cleansing, fraternal violence, all fratricide, all of this. So are we going to continue to pretend like this question hasn't already been answered? Or are we going to actually see the state for what it is? The other thing that we have to recognize as well here is that the idea of the state historically that informed what someone like Marx and Engels was, that informed what they were writing. This idea of the state that they were talking about is not the same version of the state that we know today, the nation state that we know today. It's a very different form of the state that we are now dealing with, and the state power that we are up against is just so much more monstrous. So there's also a fault and a limitation in looking to these classic writings about the potential of what it could mean to reform the state on behalf of a population. Because those writings were not looking at the state that we are facing today. It's just a completely different monster. So when we're working through this debacle, we have to recognize all of these contradictions and all of these problems. But unfortunately, we're kind of stuck because a lot of people are looking at these revolutionary texts of the past like they're Bibles, or they're referring to and referencing ideas that look at the state as something that it's just not at all. So
I'm about to pass it to Brianna in a second, but Theodore in the chat brought something up that I thought was a good follow-up point here. I'll read their comment out loud. I wonder what accounts for a watered down accounting of the state in the 21st century. I'm thinking about the 50 to 60 year distance from anti-colonial movements in Africa and attempts to negotiate state power against colonialism. I think it's an interesting question to think about that particular context. I want to hear your thoughts in response to Theodore.
Say that last. Can you read it again real quick?
The last piece you said?
Yeah, I missed the question.
So they say, I'm thinking about the 50 to 60-year distance from anti-colonial movements in Africa and attempts to negotiate state power against neo-colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just goes back to the point that I was just making, where this idea that we can rehash these past ideas about what can be accomplished. When you have this relationship with your politics, where you treat theory and past, revolutionary writings like they are religious texts, and you are looking at things through a lens of faith, and you're placing it in this predicament where it shouldn't be, then it makes it hard to recognize the failure and the limitation, because you're no longer dealing with a process where you're trying to evolve and grow and actually achieve something liberatory. It becomes much more about defending the legacy and defending the history and the idea itself than it is about actually overcoming and making conditions better for people. So with regard to the continent and anti-colonial movements, the valorization that we see of these historical movements and revolutions, which they deserve in many regards, in many places, often is filled with these absences and these erasures and these important pieces get left out, again, about atrocity and failure and limitation, because the relationship that many people have is one where they're trying to redeem the past and reenact it rather than overcome it and exceed it. And that, I guess, what I would say is that's what contributes to that watering down, is that we have a problem with addressing the fact that what was accomplished was not enough. And when we are stuck in this perpetual cycle of defending a failure or defending a limitation, rather than saying it was not enough and what can we do better, how can we overcome, then you're going to just be perpetually repeating the same mistakes. You have to be able to admit that these things that came before us that inspire us were amazing in many regards, but they were also oftentimes very much a problem and an issue as well.
Thank you for that. Brianna.
Okay, I'm gonna try and sum this up in case there are questions from other attendees as well. And Jeffrey has a second question. So in reading your work, I realized you offer a series of warnings, both explicitly, but also like if you redact, it's quite clear some of the instructions. So I wanted to read some of them before I offer the question. Some of them are in connection to other Black thinkers like Césaire. So I want to begin from the preface. There's a warning to avoid service to ideology, which I think is going back to the question you were just engaging with that Theodore offered, to reflect on who you're learning from. And I got that more from how you explain your own positionality and what it means to like clean up anti-Black messes in a way. Like just you learn so much from that vantage point, both in how you treat the person who's doing that, who does that work, but also what you're able to learn from that. Be wary when you make it appeal to academia. So like individual awards, I'm like way more skeptical of now. when certain things become new positions, like the postdoctoral freedom scholar or
Thank you.
something on anti-Blackness, like it's so difficult to know how you're either going to Trojan horse and leverage that or get sucked into the same story, right? So there's a connection that I'm seeing between the state being an institutionalization or an active process of situating relations to and about what it means to be human, which is antagonistic to what it means to be Black. And I'm mentioning that because the warnings that you offer are about practice and reflection about what we've internalized. But what I've been grappling with, and I noticed this among movements, particularly in 2020 to present, that in these visions of abolition, like I'm still Black, and Black still means the same thing it does right now. So even though there's a call to experimentation, you mentioned a few times that we need to focus on the issues Black people are going through, which like no more whataboutisms. Can we focus on Black people? But also like we cannot vote Black away. So I'm wondering like, what is it about that is connected to a vision informed by these kinds of principles? Not that it has to be anarchist, but what you're trying to get us to consider. Are we still Black in that? Or like, do you think there will be a point where we let go of that? And I feel like that has really lit people up when I mention it, but I'm wondering if we're not able to, if we're letting go of all of these kinds of investments, might that also be one? I'm curious.
I can't even answer that question because I think that it's one of those things that one person can answer. I think that that's something that is it's something that no sole individual could I think respond to and answer on their own. What I can say is that I'm looking at things through this with this Black anarchist politic, and I think that you caught something, and that you're touching on something that is maybe a piece that gets missed a lot in this book, which is that I am saying that a lot of these things have to be let go. And that also includes anarchism.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm talking about anarchism a lot of the time, I think that there's an assumption that I'm invested in restoring and rehabilitating classical anarchism from a Black perspective. I think that that's what a lot of people assume that my work is doing, that I'm here to say anarchism is good because I'm a Black person and I said it's good. And that is absolutely not what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Anarchism is a tool, and it is a method, and it is a politic, and it is a practice that has so much revolutionary potential to understand a lot of the problems that we're facing today, and to fight and rebel against those problems. So with that being the case, I see it this way strategically so that I don't get caught up in the same things that I'm critiquing and criticizing other people for doing, having this faithful relationship with their politics. So if I'm being true to what I'm talking about in this text, then even anarchism itself has to be overcome. You can't take an ideology or a practice and make it liberation itself. This is one of the problems with Western radicalism. And this is why people are caught up in all of these cycles. Everybody's going around projecting their ideology and their politic onto completely different sets of conditions and predicaments happening around the world, and saying if this group of people would just do X, then they would be free, they would be liberated. And this is a very white and colonial way to approach looking at the world. This is, it's a bunch of Enlightenment bullshit. So you have a bunch of people who adapt a politic, whether they're Black or whatever racial identification, whatever identity. They take this politic and then they go around saying, I have this idea, I have something to liberate you, I have something to free you, and I'm going to drop this on you and tell you that if you don't accept it, that you're a problem. And we can, that's just, that's full of Eurocentric conquest. That's full of so many of the things that we talk about being problems of colonialism. And so if I recognize that that's the case and I see that, then Black anarchism is something that has to work to overcome itself. And that's one of the things that I'm saying in this text when I talk about it. It has to get past itself. There's a little tiny blip in the book where I'm talking about Zen, and that's why I reference Zen. There's some parallels there that I can get into, but I don't want to get lost in my train of thought here. What I'm basically saying is that Black anarchism for me is an exit from this problem that is Western radicalism. It's an exit from the cycle that people are stuck in. It's a way out. It's a way for people to see the failures, for people to see the shortcomings, and to see the limitations. What we call ourselves or what we're going to be in the future is something that is decided collectively through struggle and through conditions and recognizing the problems that are around us. So I can't speak to that on my own as an individual. That's something that happens in community. But as we are getting there, there is no one wholly absolute answer. There is no one size fits all radicalism, because we are all different people living different lives with different goals, with different cultures and different purposes and intents and different desires. And Black anarchism for me is an understanding that recognition puts us in a place to actually have a real, true radical autonomy, where folks can have a collective liberation that isn't decided by a ruling revolutionary class or a vanguard that tells everybody what liberation is.
I'm going to indulge myself to follow up on that real quick before I pass it over to Jeffrey, William. And it's to think about this notion of Black anarchism as a way out, as an exit strategy from the pitfalls of Western radicalism and all Western revolutionary, et cetera, all the strains and streams of that tradition. And this is partly because of the militant challenge and unapologetic challenge that you're thinking in Black anarchism generally poses to various iterations of Black nationalism, from reactionary to conservative to revolutionary Black nationalism. So stemming out of that, how do you think about Black anarchism as a way out and as an exit strategy for non-Black peoples? And I say this also in part because of the fact, your book, some of the folks who endorse and love your book so much are coming from non-Black, from other non-white peoples, but like other anarchist traditions that are non-Black anarchist traditions. So I'm really curious about how you would think about the relationship, if there is one. I'm assuming there's a relationship. I should say that's my mistake if I'm assuming wrongly. But I just want to hear you think through that and think with us about that. How Black anarchism works within, against, for, through, adjacent to non-Black peoples.
I mean, the problems at hand are they play out across the board. They're not exclusive to any one race or any one group. And I think that one of the most potent examples that I could bring up right now is what's happening with the genocide that Israel is carrying out against Palestinian people. When you look at that genocide and see that a monumental, horrific, horrible event like the Jewish Holocaust can become something that can be weaponized to carry out a genocide, I think that there's a huge warning here for all sorts of people who have experienced historical oppression and genocide and monumental, extreme forms of violence, that experiencing those things and surviving those things does not make us, as I talk about Gilroy in the book, talking about the essential innocence, that because we've been through these unimaginably egregious forms of violence, it doesn't make us exceptional in a way where we are no longer capable of carrying out egregious forms of violence. And recognizing that and addressing that is extremely important, because a lot of the historical forms of Black nationalism that we've seen took the violence that we've experienced, took the oppression that we face, and made it something that was very dangerous. And in my opinion, it made Blackness, for some of these forms of Black nationalism, it made Blackness something that was essentially innocent, that was incapable of, it made Black people a people who were incapable of committing atrocity, because we had been the victims of so many atrocities. And to see that now playing out the way that it is in Gaza, to see that playing out in this really disturbing and horrific way, I think instructs us to understand that there is a confrontation that we have to have with this idea that we can take our grief and our grievances and our confrontations with oppression and put them towards something that is an idea of that we're infallible. With Black anarchism, I have been able to understand that better, because I've been able to see it not just with Black people, but across different groups of people who deal with the idea of nation and overcoming historical traumas. And it's just not unique to the African diaspora or Black people. It's not unique to any of us. It's happening across the world, everywhere. There's so many people who've been dispossessed, who've been enslaved, who've experienced genocide, who have had to confront their histories in this way, who are going to self-determine how they're going to address this violence. Are they going to fight? Are they going to try to reform? Are they going to try to build up a state? Are they going to, whatever the case may be, it's across the board. So because it is a problem that so many groups of people face, I think that there's something there in with what Black anarchism has shown me that might be beneficial to countless people. I don't think that there's a exclusivity there to how it can be read and how it could be understood.
Yeah, and I just want to reflect that back to you, William, because what I've actually had the privilege of observing over the last decade, maybe 15 years or so, is how emerging generations of Palestinian liberationists, and including organizations like Palestinian Youth Movement, Palestinian Feminist Collective, etc., are directly and centrally referencing Black revolutionary, including Black anarchist or anarchistic traditions and thought as kind of guiding analytics, principles, frameworks, and even kind of practical guidance as well for on the ground, struggles against occupation and colonization, and right now genocide, actual genocide. Yeah, so I appreciate that response. I'm gonna throw it to Jeffrey, and as I do that, let me encourage folks who are here in attendance in the Zoom to please feel free to post thoughts, questions, or even just raise your digital hand if you'd like to ask a question live, because we're heading into our last half hour with William. So yeah, I'm gonna throw it over to Jeffrey.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about what you spoke to in regards to Angela Davis's point on people thinking about abolitionists as utopians, rendered as unrealistic and impossible. And I'm thinking about how do you go about perhaps acknowledging the possible fatigue or like hopelessness one might feel in regards to the work that you do. How do you ground yourself in this perception of something as unattainable, unrealistic?
It's a hard thing, especially as we look around and see just like, again, all of these tragedies playing out. Sometimes it does feel hopeless, and sometimes it does feel desperate and confusing. But the thing that I try to always remember is that so many of the most important moments that we can recognize from recent years came out of spontaneity.
Mm.
And I when I talk about this stuff, I always feel like it sounds like I just have like a personal problem with the left, because I'm always just going and I don't want to come.
But sometimes it feels personal though.
I mean, it kind of is.
Sometimes it feels personal.
But I mean, I go back to it so much that it is what it is, whatever. So what I'll say about spontaneity is that if you look, there's a kind of a pattern, and it's not our generation or the generation before us. It goes, back, well over a century of revolutionary leadership and vanguards and self-appointed individuals oftentimes wait for that spontaneity, that spontaneous moment, that unpredictable spark that turns into uprising, that turns into revolution, that turns into rebellion and insurrection. That inspires me. Knowing that is always there inspires me. Again, we can talk about everything that's happening right now in terms of the resistance that's mounting amongst this younger generation, the way that people are becoming so politically educated and so outspoken in defense of Palestinian people and condemning this genocide. That's really inspiring, because I was organizing around Palestine when I was 18 years old, and it was nowhere near. I would have never dreamt that I would see this many people standing up and speaking out about Palestine. I would have never dreamt that I would see anything like the George Floyd uprisings. I would have never imagined. What inspires me about that is knowing that there is change happening. People are actually, despite everything, despite book bans, despite the massive imprisonment, despite the genocides, despite all of these things, there are still people getting information and standing up and saying, I'm going to do something about this. The reason I say it, the part about the left, where I said I'm about to, talk a little smack, is because this again is where we have to confront an issue. It's because when that spontaneity happens, what comes along and what, in my opinion, limits us and holds us back is we have people come along with, again, a one-size-fits-all radicalism and a pre-prescribed idea of how everything is going to get fixed. So you have these revolutionary evangelicals who come with their ideology. They come into the fire that's been caused by the spark, and they say, hey, everybody needs to be insert ideology here so that we can take this to the next level. Whether it's Marxist-Leninists, whether it's anarchists, whether it's Trotskyists, whoever. People come in and they try to insert themselves as a vanguard and then direct the masses of people who are rebelling funnel them into their ideology so that they can build up their movement and they can build up their idea of how everybody is going to get to, whatever their idea of liberation is. That holds us back. And the reason that holds us back is because, again, you cannot know what everybody needs. You cannot have an ideology that is so totalizing, it has a totalizing plan for what everybody is going to have to do, for what everybody's going to have to do to get free. You can't do that. There's too many different groups of people. This is a huge country. Yeah. There's too many different groups of people with different conditions and different needs and different ideas about what constitutes meeting needs in their life. So when we get into this cycle again of people seeing uprising, seeing this massive push, and they just want to jump in and insert themselves in their organization and their ideology and say, everybody be us, be a part of this group, so that if you do this, if we do this together, if we organize in this one specific way, we will achieve liberation, we'll have a revolution, or whatever they're preaching. That sort of proselytizing limits people from seeing their actual capacity to do something different, because they're taking people and they're cycling folks back into past versions of revolution and radicalism achieved. That may have worked 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 30 years ago, but that doesn't mean it's going to work now. And in order to actually understand what's going to work, you understand that through struggle. The reason that I got to Black anarchism was because I was organizing and I was active in my community to such an extent that I kept encountering problems that made me, again, see these limitations, as you brought up, Dylan. I was seeing these limitations. I was seeing these contradictions. I was seeing these issues. And I kept saying, oh, well, I shouldn't be doing this anymore because this doesn't work. And I shouldn't be preaching this anymore because it doesn't work. I shouldn't be over here with these folks anymore because they're not doing this. That's a process that we are supposed to encounter and we're supposed to go through and as a part of struggle to get to our politics. The problem is a lot of people are getting to their politics without the part where you go through the struggle and understand based on conditions and on experience that, oh, we should be doing X, Y, Z. There's a difference between choosing an ideology and saying, I'm going to go proselytize and tell everybody they need to be this, and being in struggle and revolutionary struggle and radical struggle in a way that positions you where you understand, I need to have this set of politics and this approach and this idea because I've done so much work that now I understand that this is what I need to be doing. So you don't just choose the politics choose you, because you understand based on the relationship that you have through being in community, through doing work, that there are things that need to be addressed that have come up as you've been understanding the environment that you're in, the work that you're doing, the people you're with. This isn't religion. You don't just choose a church home and then go out on the street and start saying, everybody start coming to my church. This is the way that people are approaching politics. This is the way that people are approaching their ideology. And that's why I describe them as zealots in my book, because at the end of the day, these people are they're performing a sort of leftist zealotry. Every single damn thing that happens in this world, you got the same factions of the left projecting themselves onto it. You people are experiencing a genocide in Palestine right now. You have people projecting themselves onto it, saying, well, if the Palestinians would do this, then they would get, what the hell? How are you going to say some shit like that? You're not even there. Right. There's no bombs falling on you. There's nobody kicking in your door, killing your family, and you're telling them what they need to do based on your ideology, something you read on a Wikipedia page a few years ago.
It's true, though.
This is what leftists do. It's cultish. It's cultish. Every single damn problem that happens in the world, they have the answer already. They're zealots. And so in order to break free from that, we have to have a politic that is actually ready to exceed the whole spectrum of all of the limitations of the left. One of the only things I feel like comes close to doing that is Black anarchism. And that's because Blackness has forced anarchists, historically, Black anarchists, to confront everything happening across the spectrum of the left. Not just the limitations around the state, but the limitations around race, the limitations around class, all of these things that Black people encounter because of our position within the society as people who have never been truly considered citizens of the country we're born into, as people who are considered seditious just because of our skin color. This is something that helps me to understand that we're going to have to get out of this whole situation when it comes to Western radicalism, when it comes to revolutionary politics. So that's where I'm at.
Hey, let me keep you there for a minute, William, because I think you're being extraordinarily generous, maybe unintentionally. So when you talk about the left and you're talking about, the Marxist-Leninists, the Trotskyists, and so forth, right? Now, there's a lot of people who are well to the right of that, who would call themselves part of the left, might even want to call themselves part of the revolutionary left, who are guided by nonprofit organizations, by streams of philanthropic and, for that matter, academic and university funding. The thing that people call the nonprofit industrial complex, which I think increasingly overlaps with the university and academic industrial complex, who I would argue constitute a liberal left that's dishonest with itself, because it does not see itself as a liberal left. I think it sees itself often as an abolitionist left, as we started this conversation talking about. And some would see themselves as a decolonial left, a radical feminist left, you know what I mean? An abolitionist queer and trans left, etc. So I want to get your thoughts on that thing, that part of what people identify as the left, people who self-identify as the left. And it's not just the lies, but it's the analysis that you just offered about this prescriptiveness, this cultishness, and so forth. Like how do you apply that analytical framework that you just laid out for us to this left that's popped off in the last 50 years or so? If we follow Robert Allen's analysis, right? Like the crucible for this was the early 1970s in reaction again to Black revolutionary activities, much of which was turning into Black abolitionist anarchist activities from the BLA onward. And by the way, I want to say how much I appreciate that you highlight the work of BLA people, including current foreign political prisoners, as working within that Black abolitionist anarchist tradition, both acknowledged and practiced. So let me put that. But yeah, what do you make of this academic and nonprofit so-called left? How do you fit that with, how do you address that within your analytic?
I don't separate it from the left that I'm talking about.
Okay.
I don't separate it from the left that I'm talking about, because the way that I'm seeing the whole shebang together, everybody's kind of operating according to this nonprofit industrial complex model, whether they are a part of that left you're talking about or a part of the left that considers themselves to be left of that. You have, a handful of organizations that really have a really like a monopoly on what people identify as like revolutionary organizations and socialism and so on and so forth. And the way that it plays out is that when these crises pop up, when these problems happen, when there's uprising, when there's rebellion, whatever the case may be, again, this is that, self-appointed vanguard that comes along, and they're at the rally with their signs and they're saying, everybody sign up for our email list, come join us and put on a t-shirt and then help us at the next event to get more people. That is essentially something that you see across this whole, this whole frame with regard to like these different factions, whether they're more liberal left or, what folks call rad libs, or whether they're, or whether it's people who are, very critical of that. People are all following this model. And there's a lot of historical context and content that needs to be observed as to why that's the case. Because I feel like if we did a better job observing the past and looking at history, that maybe we would see some of the pitfalls of that. And I think that is something that we can look at and observe even historically when we study the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was made up of different factions and different chapters who had different ideas about how things should or shouldn't proceed. But even within the splits and even within the divisions that arose within the Black Panther Party, some of those things had to do with this very question of funding, of leadership, of electoralism. Those things were happening within the party. But when we talk about the Black Panther Party, we talk about it in this very, it's very reductive, and I feel like oversimplified way, where that history oftentimes gets lost. But you had the Black Panther Party talking about electoralism, about candidates. You had the Black Panther Party, talking intercommunalism and survival programs. You also had Black Panther Party members saying, no, we need to grab some guns and go start, shooting up these government buildings. You had different people with different ideas. And again, this is part of what gives rise to Black anarchism, because within this, you have folks who ultimately say, like, this isn't working for me. I don't want to be a part of this organization. I want to go off and, do something over here, or whatever the case may be. So with regard to what I feel about that aspect of leftism, I feel like it's, again, a part of the cycle. is something that is another place where we continue to be stuck, because our, a big part of what I'm trying to push forward in this book is an understanding of history that is not based in nostalgia and romance.
Yeah.
So I think that seeing this playing out the way that it is in part because our relationship with history and our relationship with the past is so romantic that oftentimes the lessons that we need to learn get lost. So this what you're pointing to, Dylan, I feel like this is an incarnation of problems that already existed, and it's just our contemporary version.
Right on. Right on. So we have about 15 minutes left with William, and I've got 3 questions. 2 of them are from audience, and one we're gonna wrap up with Amanda's question. So bear with us. Steph, I know you're here. Did you want to ask your question live, or you want me to read it? It's up to you. I'll give you a minute in case you want to unmute yourself and ask the question live. Otherwise, I'll read it out loud.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, definitely.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. I'm in a cafe. I know it's hella loud here. So sorry about that. My question was, you're using the term state-sponsored retelling of history, which I think is a really cool term. Specifically when work to the civil rights movement, I'm wondering if this is centered on sort of like the state's interest to consistently propose like the highest, most radicalist politics are civil rights, as opposed to something like human rights. And then is this a discourse problem, or is it a problem of like collective consciousness? And it's in the chat if you couldn't hear me all the way.
I'll just say the last part out loud again in case folks had trouble hearing. Steph was asking whether this question about civil rights, the limiting of the horizon of politics and civil rights, whether it's a discourse problem or a collective consciousness problem.
I think it's both. It's in terms of I just want to make sure that I'm answering the right question. It's in terms of it being a collective consciousness problem or a discourse problem in terms of the state-sponsored version of, I just want to make sure I got all of that context. So I'm trying to.
Well, I think what Steph was getting at, just because I was digesting Steph's question in the chat before she went online to ask it. I mean, I think she's talking about the state's expropriation of and collapsing of the totality of Black liberation struggle to civil rights struggle, meaning a struggle for civil rights. That becomes the outermost horizon and or objective of radicalism, and whether the way that unfolds through state, through kind of the state's institutionalization of these narratives, whether that becomes a problem of discourse or a problem of collective consciousness, and maybe just to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to recognize that, states have their national mythology, and they have their story of how things got to be where they are, which is like, everything's perfect, right? So you have to be able to say what made everything so perfect. And the way that this happens, particularly with civil rights history and with Black history, is particularly offensive to me as someone who's a Birmingham native, because I grew up seeing this telling of civil rights history every year of my life, constantly, all throughout school. You hear it every day in grade school growing up. And what you're being told is essentially that Black people were enslaved and brutalized and segregated and experienced Jim Crow apartheid so that we could all live happily ever after. It was just a part of this happy story. And that sort of indoctrination is something that I feel is so deep rooted in US society that it does become a collective consciousness problem, because people very much internalize it. People take it to be something that is this absolute truth. And then again, this sort of romantic version of history where there's all these major erasures taking place is how people understand themselves in relation to society. And I just feel like that's so important for us to counter, because even the versions of civil rights history that we get are not true to the complexity and the intricacy of the civil rights movement. Because I learned about the Children's March in Birmingham and kids getting attacked with water hoses and with dogs, but I didn't learn about the guys who were breaking bottles and attacking those dogs and fighting with the police. Both things were happening, but I only learned about part of the story. So that state-sponsored telling of history has everything to do with keeping people in this complacent, idealizing spot where they're constantly feeling like, there's already been so much accomplished that there's not that much left for them to do. Now, if I can just slide in, because I'm going to talk about the left again, if I can just slide in a little point there about leftists.
You can slide in.
What you have, when one of the reasons I'm bringing that up in the text, and I didn't necessarily say this explicitly all the time, but you have a lot of people who are on the statist left who are embracing that sort of patriotism for national and state projects abroad. And their version of radical politics is just repeating these other states, their national mythology, and saying, oh, that doesn't happen in this. You mean we'll literally tell people from other countries what did and didn't happen historically to them and groups that they may represent because they've embraced this national mythology. So I just wanted to point that out with this text, because it has everything to do with how people think about themselves and struggle, and in terms of what's actually possible.
Right on. So we have two questions we want to close with, and Amanda insists that Brianna ask her question and said, so Brianna, yours will be the last question. I want to move to Tiana's question, who's here attending as an audience member on Zoom. Tiana, if you like, you can ask your question live. I think you unmuted, so go for it.
Yeah, sure. Hi. My question is, yeah, I guess I'll just skip to the bottom. I guess one thing I was noticing from this conversation is how you were, I guess like a thread I noticed was how you were almost critiquing people's or groups, their desires in a way, whether it's leftists or authoritarians, and kind of like what they want. And, a lot of the discussion has been about the fetishization of texts, of dogmatic texts, and the romanticization of the past, whether it's the civil rights movement or anti-colonial movements. And yeah, I guess I just had a general question about desire, and I see this playing out too in the celebrity chapter. So I just want to hear more about how you contend with like the psychic or psychosocial aspects of your work, and like, this question that I asked was like, do we or does the left even want to get free, and kind of what stands in the way of that stuckness of like looking for that exit sign, as you put it. Like what role does the kind of psychic play? And I guess another word for that might be collective consciousness, which was raised earlier, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with the indoctrination of leftists and the zealotry that I'm talking about is that if you can't even see if you can't even see that you're stuck, how are you going to have a desire to not be stuck? And so this overwhelming orthodoxy and cultism that is so pervasive across the left, a lot of people don't actually see that they're participating in something like that. And I'm not projecting in this situation. I'm saying this because I come out of that. I come out of that. I used to be a part of organizations and in proximity to different factions of the left. I actually hated, and I'm going to start talking about this more. I'm realizing that I need to talk about it more, but I actually used to hate, I despised anarchists. I was very outspoken about how much I couldn't stand anarchists, and when I was in organizing spaces, I was very antagonistic towards anarchism, but I didn't know anything about anarchism. And then when I finally did start to understand and start to learn and grow, that helped me to develop the analysis that I have now, because I was able to see my past self. And that barrier and that block, I think, for a lot of folks for overcoming this, I think has everything to do with how we approach radicalism as a whole, in terms of it being rooted in, again, these sort of problems of the Enlightenment that come from this colonial thinking, where we feel that if we find the right idea, that is going to fit wherever we go. And so I think that if we're actually challenging the roots of Western radicalism, I have this, I'll jump to the side here and say, I put that quote from Robinson in the book where he says, I can't name, I just call me a Black radical because I can't offer a name to this. And when I was putting that quote at the beginning of that chapter, the reason I put it there and the reason that I bring up Zen is because the way that I'm thinking about liberation now is largely influenced by my relationship with Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And to make a long story short, I used to have a very religious relationship with Buddhism, and I don't anymore. And the reason that transformed was because ultimately I started understanding that it wasn't just going to be me sitting in the lotus and staring at a wall and meditating 3 times a day or whatever, and just reading Zen koans or reading the whatever text that was going to help me, reach enlightenment or anything like that. Ultimately, what was going to make me understand and get closer towards what I was trying to achieve through Buddhist practice was going to be understanding my own nature and myself. That was something that I had to, a conclusion that I had to come to. The reason that I talk about that in relation to liberation and in relation to leftism and these predicaments is because you see a similar parallel where folks have already decided what liberation is and what it's going to look like. But liberation is not some finite, defined place. Liberation is us actually being able to live and to thrive in ways where liberation is us being able to live and thrive in ways that we can't predict. How can you say that we've achieved liberation, or this is what liberation is going to look like, when you have no idea what that set of conditions will be, what the world is going to be, what the environment is going to look like? So you oftentimes hear that come up a lot of times, that when you hear socialists talk about history, they'll say this group of people was liberated and they achieved liberation. but the conditions are still not what they should be. People are still suffering. There's still class. There's still people who are poor. There's still people who are oppressed. There's still people who are discriminated against. The way that I'm thinking about liberation now is that this is a process of us constantly working and us constantly struggling to make things better and better and better to try to get to the best that they can be. And that journey that I had where I was understanding that in Buddhism, it's not that you're just sitting there staring at text and memorizing and meditating to achieve nirvana. It's that you are actually understanding your nature and you're actually putting yourself in the world to a place where you can actually overcome and transcend, inserting yourself in that way, as opposed to thinking that you have already figured something out just by observing the Dharma and studying the Dharma. Very much parallels what I'm talking about here with leftism. So that's how I feel I've been able to recognize this. And I think that in order for people to break free and to overcome that barrier, that there has to be an intervention around how they see themselves in relation to struggle and radicalism that is a lot more humble and that is a lot more curious, and that doesn't set these terms that doesn't place these terms on top of people and places and things that we're just unable to place at this current time because we haven't even gotten there yet.
I like the way you put together humility and curiosity. I appreciate that. I'm gonna crib that, and I may or may not cite you, William. It's beautiful. I'm gonna let Brianna close us out, and I know we started a little bit late, you all, so we'll continue a little bit late. So, Brianna, why don't you close us out?
Okay. I don't even know if this is a great question to end with. So it's in the chat if you'd like to read it. And when I was taking notes, I accidentally drew a line through the nation and unknown map, which helped where this question came from. So the unknown map part that you're thinking of and what you're writing, I'm wondering to what extent it offers maybe questions, the warnings, tools, or things to consider in how we experiment in this call for transformation. And if this is focusing on the issues that Black people face, which is part of what you keep bringing our attention back to, because as you say, Blackness forces us to confront everything, then what might the thing we call a Black diaspora be a political strategy or vocabulary for?
I think I need to read your question here again, because I started hearing that part about the no map and I focused on that, and I think I missed the second half of your question a little bit. So in terms of about addressing the no map aspect, not no nap, I need a nap clearly. In terms of addressing no map, what were you asking there?
In all of the things you were thinking about in calling the nation unknown map, like what it means to be unknown map, what made the book, what didn't make the book, maybe where you are with that now. I'm wondering in terms of practical things we can use for the reflections you're calling for, right? The boundaries within us, the way the politics have become somatic, right? They're in our programming, they're in our practices. I'm wondering, what about the unknown map in your thinking gives us tools, questions, protocols, reminders that we should take away as we are practicing this transformation you're calling for? That's the first half of the question.
So answering that first half, I'll say, one of the things that I bring up in the introduction is just that I, was really pushed in this direction largely by work that I was doing, organizing work that I was doing in the immigrant rights movement. And I had a lot of time when I was younger to think about borders and to think about the map, because I saw the violence of borders up close and personal. I was working on deportation cases with undocumented activists. I was, doing a lot of I was having a lot of interactions with people who were in deportation proceedings. I was interacting a lot with people in detention centers. And I started asking myself these questions about the way that the world is drawn, about cartography, about the way that we think about the way that everything is arranged. And when I started pairing that with the idea of the nation state as the only legitimate way that we can organize political community and the world as we know it, I started saying that, the map itself is a part of our problem, because it distorts and disinherits and dispossesses, and it actually does a lot to undermine the things that we would imagine would be better for us as people across the globe. And in order to get to that place, I think that we have to, in order to get to this place where things are more liberatory, or where conditions are more liberatory, I think that we have to actively challenge borders. I think that we actively have to challenge the legitimacy of the map as we know it. Mm-hmm. So to say the nation on no map, I feel at the time I was still being forgiving towards the idea of the nation. I say something to the effect of, like, what if we're a nation that doesn't have to be a nation? Now I feel like at this point in my life, I feel pretty firm that the nation and the map and the state and borders and all of these conceptions are things that we don't have to offer any sort of forgiveness to. They're not ours, and they're not things that we have to claim for any sort of liberatory intent or purpose. So saying the nation on no map is a reference also, as I mentioned, to a Gwendolyn Brooks poem where she's talking about Chicago gangs, and she describes them as a nation on no map. And because of our unique position as Black people in this country who are descended from slaves, that statelessness that I'm describing that we experience, I feel like it primes us to be in a unique position to get away from these things being legitimate because of our really troubled history with citizenship and with statelessness and with enslavement and dispossession. So that's really what is being recognized there with that no map piece. And I think that in terms of the future, that can speak to a sort of guiding principle, that relationship that we have with this society and with the world can actually be a guiding principle towards just letting it go. Just letting it go, because if it just hasn't served you, I mean, you don't have to keep clinging to it.
I think that's an excellent place to depart, and I think that this study session will be useful for other people, especially people who have read the book, people who will be guided toward the book. I want to thank you for the gift of this book, William. I mean, that's how I experienced this contribution. It's changed my thinking. It's really emboldened me to think with and against a bunch of different streams of radicalism, and what I'm realizing are anarchist and anarchistic strains. So so thank you for this gift. And I also want to say that I really appreciate the way you the way you led our thinking tonight. I think you exemplify exactly the form, one of the ways to kind of do this form of experimental study that I was interested in trying to cultivate and provoke when thinking with the students in this class about this study sequence. So thank you. I want to express my love for you too. I love you.
I appreciate that, Dylan. I love you too, and I appreciate you welcoming me into the space, and I appreciate all the things I've learned from you as well. You know, you are a dynamic and great thinker yourself, and I just appreciate being in the space with all of you and the amazing questions. Clearly, there's so much brilliance and intelligence in the room, and I hope that I made sense. I get, you know, all over the place when I'm talking about this stuff, because it's very big problems, and like I said, I need a nap. So
I like the way you talk about sense, the way you talk about truth, the way you talk about liberation, the way you talk about all this. So this is just a great way to bring this this fall version of our study sequence to a temporary, momentary point of departure. I don't want to call it a close, because I think that the study continues. This is catalyzing. So thank you for this. And thank you, folks. Hey, thank you to everybody who came through tonight, especially people who might not be in the PST time zone. I know it's getting late. And William, I know you keep talking about a nap. You're making me want to take one. So hey, so thank you everyone. Thank you everyone. Hey, thank you everyone that's here in the classroom with us. And we'll talk soon. All right, y'all. All right, peace. Thank you. Thank you, William. Talk to you soon. Night.